Hello again and welcome back to CLLI Marketing. Today we're going to be talking about how to create a safe island for your TM UNIFI setup. Now for a typical residential TM UNIFI setup, it's going to be divided into two setups. The first one will be your TM UNIFI LAN equipment setup, which would comprise the BTU or the broadband termination unit, the RG or the residential gateway, and the DEC phone. And in the next segment, we're going to be talking about how to create a safe island for your TM UNIFI IPTV setup or your set-top box. And the setup box is right here. So because we're not going to be talking about the setup box in this segment, we're going to be removing it for the moment. Okay. So as in previous segments, we're going to go through again the same three-step process. The first step is to identify the equipment you want to protect as well as the external connections. Second step is to unify the equipment in that setup into a single system. And the third step is to ensure correct CLLI or correct CLLI blinding isolator installation. Now in this particular case, we are talking about the TM UNIFI LAN equipment setup. So for a typical setup, you would have the broadband termination unit, the residential gateway, a DEC phone, and perhaps a connected PC. So let's take a closer look at these equipment, shall we? Now this is a TM UNIFI broadband termination unit, or BTU. Let's take a closer look at the back of it to see its connections. Okay. Now you can see here the first connection is the power supply. Okay, and you have the 4 LAN ports. Now apparently TM UNIFI has specifically say that only one LAN port can be used to connect to your residential gateway. The VoIP, again the DEC phone, this is for the DEC phone connection, and the incoming DSL line. Now in this particular case, if your residential incoming line is fiber optic, then it would not be considered as an external connection. But in this particular case, the incoming DSL line is a twisted pair, so this connection would be considered as an external connection. Okay. Now on to the residential gateway. Now this is a D-Link wireless switch. So you can see at the back here, the connections would be the power supply, the WAN port, and 4 LAN ports. Now the external connections would be the power supply, as well as the 4 LAN ports. Now the WAN port would be considered an internal connection because the residential gateway would be connected to the BTU through this WAN port. And since the residential gateway, BTU, and the DEC phone all draw power supply from one source, the WAN port is considered an internal connection. Okay. So that's the residential gateway. Now let's take a look at the a DEC phone. Okay, this is the DEC phone provided by TM UNIFI. Okay, I'm just going to remove the phone itself and let's take a look at the base station. Now the connection at the back, you can see one is for the telephone line which will be connected to the VoIP port of the BTU, and this is the power supply for the base station. So these two would be considered external connections as well. Alright? So let's take a closer look at these external connections, okay? Now, we've already identified the equipment you want to protect in this particular case, so we're going to go ahead and draw the green circle to represent the imaginary boundary, which is the island. And then the external connection, as mentioned, the BTU would have the incoming RJ11 or twisted pair in our particular case. Again, if you are having an incoming line as fiber optic, then you don't have to consider that as an external connection. And of course, the power supply here. Residential gateway, power supply, as well as the 4 LAN connections. In this particular case, we're going to highlight one, which will be connected to your IPTV setup box, which we'll discuss in the next segment. DEC phone, power supply, and of course, if you have a PC, power supply. Also take note, we have internal amber or orange lines connecting each equipment, but that would be considered internal connections, okay? So in this particular case, this is step 1. We've identified the equipment you want to protect as well as external connections. First one, incoming DSL line. Second one, power supply. Third one, LAN connections. Okay? So in step 2, we want to unify the equipment in this setup into a single system. So please draw again your attention to the right hand side of the board. Now to unify your equipment, again, we need the 3 steps. The first step is to ensure that you use the correct lightning isolator models. For this particular case, we're going to be using the MDSC0039 for the power supply. We are going to be using the, let me see where I can write this, SP9201DSL for the incoming twisted pair line, and for the LAN connections, we're going to be using the SLAN1236. Okay, so That's the first step. Now the second step is to ensure that all the equipment stated here, which is your BTU, your residential gateway, DEC phone, and perhaps a CPU, will draw power supply from a single lightning, power lightning isolator, in this particular case the MDSC0039. So the power strip would then be connected to the lightning isolator, and the lightning isolators, or the MDSC0039's 3-pin plug, will be connected again to the wall outlet, first point of contact to the wall. Okay? Now the third step is to ensure that all CLLI lightning isolators earth wires, as can be seen here, is to be connected back to the earth terminal of the main power isolator, in this case the MDSC0039. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw it here like this. One terminal, and then here to be connected to this terminal, like such. Okay? So that's step number 2, to unify the equipment in this system into a single, to unify the equipment in this setup into a single system. Let's take a look at step number 3, to ensure correct CLLI installation. Now we've already talked about power connection. Let's talk about the next external connection, which is the incoming DSL line. Now in this particular case, it will come in as an RJ11 plug. We're going to be plugging in into the SP9201 DSL, which for the connection side, which marked from cable. And then there will be an RJ11 plug connector which says to machine, whereby you're going to be connecting it to your broadband termination unit. Okay? On to the next external connection. From the IPTV setup box, you would have a LAN connection coming in. Before it goes into your equipment you want to protect, make sure it's terminated or connected to the SLAN1236 from the side which says from cable. Again, the SLAN1236 would have an RJ45 plug which says to machine. Why don't you just go ahead and connect that to your residential gateway as such. Okay? So that's step number 3, to ensure correct CLLI installation. Now let's take a look at the physical form of the isolators itself. Alright, now this is the MDSC0039 for the power supply. Just clear this place a little bit to show you the rest. And then we have the SP9201 for the incoming DSL line in the form of twisted pair. And then we have the SLAN1236 for the LAN connection. Now, as can be seen here, we have an earth terminal. This will be connected to the green earth wires of the remaining 2 isolators here. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect it for you as such. Make sure that both earth terminals are unscrewed. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and connect the green wire of the SP9201, or the earth wire of the SP9201 to one terminal, such, and I'm going to screw it down, and then go ahead and do the same for the SLAN1236 earth wire. Okay, it's going to be connected into the other terminal right here. Alright, there we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and screw it down. Okay? So as you can see, both green or earth wires are connected to the earth terminal of a main power isolator. Ensure correct installation as such. When we've stated conventions, make sure you follow the conventions, okay? So this is how you create a safe island for your TM UNIFI LAN equipment setup. In the following segment, we're going to show you how to create a safe island for your TM UNIFI IPTV setup or your set-top box setup, okay? So thank you for your time and stay tuned for the following segment. Alright, so now we're going to be talking about how to create a safe island for your TM UNIFI set-top box. As in the previous segment where we've already shown you how to create a safe island for your TM UNIFI LAN equipment setup, we'll again go through the same 3-step process. Very quickly, the first step is to identify the equipment you want to protect and the external connections. Step 2 is to unify the equipment in the setup into a single system. And step 3 is to ensure correct CLLI or CLLI lightning isolator installation. Now for a typical TM UNIFI setup box, you have the setup box itself, of course. Most probably placed with the LCD or plasma TV, probably a DVD player, and most probably an Astro decoder. Again, these are the equipment you have. We're going to go ahead and draw the green circle to signify the island. And then now we're going to identify the external connections. But before we do that, let's take a closer look at the TM UNIFI setup box itself. Now this is the TM UNIFI setup box, okay? Let's take a closer look at the back of the setup box where we can see the connections. You would have the RJ45 LAN connection, which is connected to the TM UNIFI residential gateway. The composite connection, which will be connected to the TV. S-Video, which will connect the video connection to your TV. SPDIF for high definition audio connection to perhaps your amplifier or DVD player. HDMI connection for transmitting high definition signals to your TV or HD TV. USB 2.0 port and the DC input. Okay, so the only connection which will be considered an external connection on the setup box itself would be the RJ45 LAN connection, which will be connected to the residential gateway at a different setup. The rest of the connections that you can see here will be connected to the equipment in the same setup as the setup box and can be seen here. Okay, so let's take a look at the other connections or external connections besides the LAN cable. You'd of course have the coaxial cable coming in from the satellite dish to the Astro decoder, and then all these equipment of course would have power supply as external connection number 2, and then your, as mentioned just a moment ago, the connection of the RJ45 LAN connection to the TM UNIFI LAN equipment, okay, or LAN setup. Now that's step number 1. We've identified the equipment you want to protect as well as the external connections. Let's take a look at step number 2, which is how to unify the equipment into a single system. Now please draw your attention to the right hand side of the screen, or the board, sorry. Now, in order to fulfill criteria number 2, there are 3 sub-criteria that we need to take in mind. The first one is to make sure that we use the correct lightning isolator model. In this particular case, we are going to be using the MDSC0039FC for the power supply as well as the coaxial cable connection for the satellite dish. And we are going to be using the SLAN1236 for the LAN connection. Okay? So sub-criteria number 1 is to use the correct lightning isolator model. Sub-criteria number 2 is to ensure that all equipment in that particular setup draw power supply from one power lightning isolator. In this particular case, all the equipment here would draw power supply through a power strip or power bar and would be connected to the MDSC0039FC itself. And then of course, the MDSC0039FC's 3-pin plug will be connected to a wall outlet, or the first point of contact to the wall. Okay? That is sub-criteria number 2. Sub-criteria number 3 is to make sure that all isolators are connected to a main power isolator through the earth wire. So the SLAN1236 would have an earth wire which would be connected to the earth terminal of the MDSC0039FC. Okay? So that's step number 2, to unify the equipment into a single system. Let's take a look at step number 3 to ensure correct CLLI installation. Now, we've already handled the power supply external connection. Let's take a look at external connection number 2, which is the coaxial cable from the satellite dish. This will be connected to the MDSC0039's F connector, and then the output will be connected to your Astro decoder itself. Okay? What about the LAN setup or the LAN connection? Now, the connection or the LAN cable coming from the TM residential gateway will be connected to the SLAN1236 at the terminal marked from cable, and then there will be an RJ45 plug which says to machine, and you'll be connecting it to your TM UNIFI setup box. Okay, so this is step number 3 to ensure correct CLLI installation. Now let's take a look at the physical form itself. Now this is the MDSC0039FC. As you can see, let me just hold it this way. Okay, there you go. As you can see, it's like the drawing right here. This is where you would plug the power supply of all the equipment in that setup using a power strip, and this will be connected to a wall outlet. This is the F connector, which will be connecting the incoming cable from your satellite dish, and then we'll be connecting this back to your Astro decoder. this is the earth terminal where you need to connect the earth wire of the CLLI 1236. So let me just show you how it's done. Go ahead and plug the earth cable into any one of these earth terminals right here. I'll just plug it in, and then I'll just screw it down. Okay? So this is a very important step without which you can still sustain equipment damage when there is lightning strike. So this is how you create a safe island for your TM UNIFI setup box with all the other equipment in that same setup using the MDSC0039FC and the SLAN 1236. So thank you very much for your time, and stay tuned for the next segment.